to sum it up, what was Leary's approach before he discovered the far stronger psychedelic agent LSD was that instead of how it usually worked in those days, narrowing down human psychology to a certain role that was considered obligatory for everyone in society, he did two very different things. The first thing would be relativization from his psychological approach. And he would say there were different social games people play with many different roles and people participating in these games for many different reasons. And the other thing which was introduced by the administration of psychedelic mushrooms was the expansion of the horizon, putting things into perspective, like toward something like the other direction of general psychology in those days. And only then he actually discovered LSD, or was introduced to LSD. I'll just give one short scene from one of the more famous experiments that Leary did in the Concord State Prison, where they actually were taking psilocybin together with inmates. And one of the convicts asked Leary, "Why are you scared of me?" And Leary answered, "Because you're a criminal. And why are you afraid of me?" And the convicts answered, "I'm afraid of you because you're a fucking mad scientist." And then they both laughed, and a connection was made, and the atmosphere started to improve. This was the effect that psilocybin had on all these tests, that it actually created the common ground that Leary was looking for it. So when he was already encouraged by these results with psilocybin, and we'd already set sail for this course of a more egalitarian, universal, and evolutionary form of therapy or psychological research, he found something like the sacrament he had been looking for, which was much stronger than psilocybin and had new qualities to it that made it all different. LSD. Because I think that this is not like 30 years ago that most people know these differences between these substances from first-hand experience. I will just compare them shortly. Because in those days these substances were still legal, and nowadays they're not only illegal, like for you and me to purchase or use them somewhere, but they're also illegal for research, which means that only like secret services have access to them for research, or whoever takes the risk. The difference is, I mean, the first obvious thing is the duration of a typical trip. With psilocybin you're up to like 4 to 5 hours. LSD usually works far longer, double the amount of time. So psilocybin is something that happens in an afternoon or an evening, and LSD actually takes a day or more. And what they both do is they dock onto the nervous system, onto neurotransmitters that are actually designed to process serotonin. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter responsible for our sense of reality, if you may say so. And these substances, there are more, they are working similar, are treated by the nervous system as if they were serotonin. And that's why it's so real what happened. That's why it's actually just a different perception of reality, or people who are very eager of these substances would say that it is a different reality. This is something that they both do. LSD does something more. It also is an agonist not only for serotonin but also for dopamine. So it goes much deeper into the emotional fabric of the human mind. Which is not to say that this function of that they are agonists of serotonin would not have any emotional impact. They contribute not only to the reality sense, but to the general well-being to begin with. People with low serotonin levels generally tend to feel bad or depressed, and there are strong connections between daylight, serotonin levels, and our general attitude towards the world. The good news for nerds is, of course, that the serotonin level can be raised not only by daylight, but also by stimulants like, for example, caffeine or sugar. So if there are short film anyway, so I could just go further to that. And this film is thought to be to demonstrate the effect of daylight under psilocybin conditions. And what I'm showing is a short movie about the famous Marsh Chapel experiment, where students of theology were administered psilocybin and had some kind of religious ceremony under these conditions. And you probably understand how controversial this was, like in the early 1960s. I will quote John Hicks for that. The implication here was that a state previously considered a blessing from God could be induced by man more or less at will. The church might not be able to achieve this, but Leary's magic pill could. He couldn't have offended people anymore if he tried. But what I'm showing this for is actually for the role of daylight. If you look at it, this perspective, you will see that when they are still inside the church, the experience is totally different to when they go outside.
Remarkable results. The Marsh Chapel experiment was designed by graduate students under Leary's supervision. It investigated whether psilocybin, taken in a religious setting, could induce experiences comparable to those described by the great mystics. Randall Larko was one of 10 theology students who took the psilocybin. I had a real struggle with the Bible, and at one point I thought, in fact, I had died and I was in hell. I began saying the Bible verse, "For God so loves the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." And I kept repeating that over and over again, and then I came to the awareness that this wasn't helping me at all.
Larko fled from the chapel, with Leary following. Outside, his terror evaporated.
It was a glorious sunny day. I remember seeing an elderly couple walking down the sidewalk hand in hand, and that was the most profound and beautiful experience to me. This was an image of people who indeed loved one another and had lived their lives together. Everything in the world just seemed to glow inwardly with life. Everything was alive, and I don't mean just living things, but even inanimate things. They just lived. And I was seeing things like I had never seen them before.
Leary steered Larko back into the chapel.
I do remember lying down on the floor. Leary lay right next to me, almost as though we were lovers. I can remember the smell of his hair, being extremely physically close, and then feeling my hand run down his body, touching him. What he was doing was giving me human contact again.
9 of the 10 theology students reported that they had indeed experienced something like a mystical revelation.
I would say, yeah, it did change my life. The experience that day demonstrated to me the reality of God's presence in all the world and in all experience. If our eyes are opened and we are able to perceive and take that in. And by eyes, I mean our spiritual inner awarenesses.
The experiment had demonstrated that psychedelics could indeed open the doors of perception.
Clear how the whole mood changed when the daylight was up.